Yo, what up, everybody? It's your boy Carson Fox with another edition of Fox on West Virginia Mountaineers Sports, and I'm so excited because we have something to talk about. Woo! All right, some news broke today that Neal Brown restructured his contract with West Virginia University as the head football coach of the program. And that's why I say it. I'm leading this show off by saying it was a restructure rather than what made the news and set off a faction. And we know the faction that I reference all the time, the Neal Brown hating faction of West Virginia Nation. That's calling after an extension. You would have thought traditionally this meant more years, a pay raise, and it already had the naysayers out there saying, well, what has Neal Brown done to deserve any sort of a raise and extension like this? So let's pause. Let's hold it. I'm going to break it all down for you today based upon what I've researched in the details. The devil's always in the details, y'all. That is what is most important to this news for today. And what does it mean in context for the program, Neal Brown personally, the other coaches on the staff, players, et cetera, and moving forward. So 3 things I want to talk about today. That being the biggest news that broke today, reported by multiple outlets, but it really seemed like the guys over at WV Metro News were on the case with Greg Hunter saying on Sunday, really, afternoon that there were rumblings of this happening, and then the news dropping today, Tuesday. So I want to talk about FanDuel's Big 12 sports betting odds and where West Virginia comes in, just like Late Kicks Josh Pate saying that West Virginia was about 10th in the program standings in the Big 12, right around where FanDuel is pegging West Virginia for the 2024 seasons and winning the Big 12 championship. And then I want to talk about at the very end kind of the bigger picture on three's Andy Staples and ESPN's Cole Cubelic having West Virginia in the prophesied Super League with the Big Ten Conference on one side, SEC on another side, and where West Virginia fits in. But let's backtrack of how I led off. The news today about Neal Brown's contract restructuring. Now, this actually is a pay cut in a way. It decreases Neal Brown's salary $400,000 over the course of the next 3 seasons. So for 2024, Brown was slated to make $4.1 million, now down to $4 million. Biggest pay cut here in 2025 from a $4.2 million salary, again staying at $4 million. 2026 slated to make $4.4 million, instead $4.3 million. But now the contract extension adds a year, 2027, at $4.4 million. Also, this reduced Neal Brown's buyout to 75% of his contract's remainder for the duration of its term. So, putting that into layman's terms, if Neal Brown is fired during the season, September 1st after Penn State, or if it's all the way through the regular season by the end of November, or even after the season, if there's a postseason. So let's just call it that. I did the numbers for you there. 75% of 2025, 26, and 27, that's $9,525,000, which again, big for you and me. But in the grand scheme of things, I found $3.2 million less than what it was previously. So he's taking a pay cut for this season. He's reducing his buyout potentially of what West Virginia could potentially have to pay him if they were to fire him. But it also, I guess, on the one positive side, or you know, if you want to call those negatives against Brown a positive for Brown, you want to put it this way: if Brown leaves for another job at any point under the revamped contract, he is to pay only 10% of his remaining total salary, which I think was much higher under the old terms. So for 2025, 2026, 2027, let's say it's after a standout 2024 season, 10% of his remaining total salary would just be $1,270,000. So I guess that's where it gives a little bit of Neal Brown and another school leverage if 2020. So I guess what that paints the picture on the wall is this contract is really just for 2024 that in less than a year from now, that this will be, and it might be, in the same year of 2024 before the clock strikes midnight on New Year's Eve of this year, that Neal Brown will be working another contract extension raise with the athletic department, the university, about restructuring these terms and giving him this raise. Otherwise, another school can come in and just has to pay $1.27 million, and then whatever it's going to pay Neal Brown to get him as another school's next head coach. So it puts the onus back on West Virginia, and I'm going to talk about this in a bit, that if he exceeds expectations, gets to the Big 12 championship and the college football playoff, that West Virginia's going to have to pay him. So much to the chagrin of the Neal Brown haters out there, if 2024 is what many fans are hoping it's going to be, that's what you're going to have to do. So let me step back before I dive down into that rabbit hole, which I might hear in a little bit. And I think the bigger picture question that all of us, Neal Brown supporters, people who are in the middle, people who are on the opposite side, they're asking themselves, why do this and why do it now? So I really have 1A and 1B reasons after really pondering this over all today. So I would say Wren Baker, athletic director, believes two things. He believes in Brown enough to buy into what, dare I say it, and him, previous athletic director Shane Lyons thought, is that Neal Brown would produce the results that would outperform his salary that's outside the top 40 coaches in America. Go back. I know it's ways away, it seems like. Even after Shane Lyons was fired, very soon after he was hired, the terms of Neal Brown's contract in 2019 and what he's said since he's been fired is exactly this, is that he was betting on Neal Brown to pan out, and West Virginia could afford to pay him outside the top 40. Now again, a lot happened from 2019 to the end of this 2023 season, and I finally think that there is this place that you can evaluate Neal Brown from this start of this past season here on out. 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022 is in the past, as Rafiki would say from Lion King. Revisionist history. I know it counts against his overall coaching record. It's counted against West Virginia. Talked about many a times on previous videos, the drop in program prestige that West Virginia experienced during the worst 4-year history since the Frank Signetti, finally remembered his name since my past video, since the Frank Signetti era of the late 70s into early 80s, when Don Nehlen finally took over the program and built West Virginia into its modern era. It was bad. It was the dark ages 2.0. So now it's a whole different story, and Baker buys into it. Being around this program for about an entire year, sees the synergy that's happening with Country Roads Trust. Here's what I'll say, point two. Talking about the top 40 coaches in America, this is what I don't think that dawns upon Mountaineer Nation all that often. If you look at some of the guys that are ahead of Neal Brown in total salary, some of these names, and I know some of them have already been fired, but would probably shock you. Dino Babers at Syracuse, Tony Elliott at Virginia, Dave Clawson, Wake Forest, previous head coach Dana Holgerson down at Houston, Justin Wilcox at Cal, Tom Allen at Indiana, Dave Doran, NC State, Mike Loxley, Maryland, Jeff Brom, Louisville, Pat Narduzzi at Pitt, and Brett Bielema making $6.5 million at lowly Illinois, who never, how many good years has Illinois had in the last 22? Come on. So it's like Neal Brown is not getting paid like a top 40 coach. And if you live by the adage of you get what you pay for, then by getting to 9-4, just for the 19th time in program history that West Virginia gets to 9 wins in a season, that's he did what he was being paid for, or even higher. And with the time and attention that he's now able to pay to really developing relationships with players, to developing them, their on-field abilities, coaching these other assistant coaches, some, young guys and some veteran coaches on this staff. You got to see, once Drew Fabianich was hired, especially this past July, everything that he and the scouting directors and assistant coaches have been able to do from a roster management standpoint, in tandem with Country Roads Trust, in retaining these players. So it's a whole different story. There's no more excuses. He's got some guys who are helping him out on this. Stephen Ford at Country Roads Trust, Drew Fabianich from a roster management standpoint and managing the transfer portal. Here we go. This is where Neal Brown can finally be evaluated as a head coach. And, second point, that one being my one about not being paid in the top 40, and this is now proof in the pudding that Baker believes in what Shane Lyons was preaching. I think that Baker believes that Brown is worth a big payday if he exceeds goal, but it's still too big of a risk to reward him right now, preseason going into 2024. So I'm going to back that up. With my claim, it's too big of a risk right now to go in and do a Lance Leipold raise an extension with more years, paying him above $6 million or into the $7 million dollar figure or higher. West Virginia has to win 8 games with a schedule that includes 5 opponents that will probably be ranked in the preseason, as I've said a number of times on my videos. Penn State, Kansas, Oklahoma State, Kansas State, Arizona. There's your 5 right there. And what I said in my last video, West Virginia played 3 teams that floated in, or at least for Oklahoma's case, but Oklahoma, Penn State, those 3 programs, they lost all 3 of them by double digits. So if you can match it, if you get to that 8-win goal, which I said once the schedule released, what was that, just like a month ago or so, you can probably leave this deal in place, but exceed it if he gets to 9 wins or more, and he's going to demand that kind of raise that constitutes $7 million or more. Like I said, this is history repeating itself, like Rich Rodriguez and Dana Holgerson all together. This has been the story with West Virginia for what's going on, it seems like 20 years. They bought low, on Rich Rod, as an up-and-comer, first-time head coach at what that one was the P6 level. Same with Dana Holgerson. He got finally to 2020, to 2016. They gave him a little bit of a raise, got Will Greer. And once 2018 came along, wanted that raise once again to be paid into the top 40 like Houston was going to. And West Virginia said, no, we'll pass. So when you really step back and look at the bigger picture of college football, is those guys, and I didn't even talk the heaviest hitters in college football of what, previously Nick Saban was getting paid, Kirby Smart, Brian Kelly, Lincoln Riley, you name it. If you see West Virginia in the same vein as some of these top 25 programs in college football, which we're going to talk about in the Super League, but I mean, in your heart, West Virginia is a top 20 program. Are they a top 40 program? Well, West Virginia is not paying its head coach like it. So that, and that's what I mean. That's what I come back to at the end of the day. And like I said, West Virginia has synergy with Country Roads Trust. I don't want to really spoil anything that I have going and build up of my fan experience series of videos I'm going to be coming out with very soon. Had a really good conversation, just to tease it, last week with a member of the athletic department ticketing office, so to talk about tickets for this upcoming season. But according to this gentleman in the ticketing office, season ticket sales are up in comparison to this past year. And like I said, West Virginia won 9 games last year, so for just the 19th time in over 130 years worth of history. So there is positive momentum around this program. So if a guy's going to meet goal or pass expectations, keep him at the helm. So you don't want to have a situation, and I think that's what this shows. I think, like, it's admirable. I think that both parties, Baker on behalf of West Virginia, Brown on behalf of himself and his agent, are negotiating this in good faith. It's a risk on both sides, like I said. Is by lowering that buyout for another school to potentially swoop in, like apparently South Carolina was in 2020, when instead it hired Shane Beamer, but was apparently sniffing around Neal Brown, bringing him in. So you've reduced that buyout for another potential suitor to come in and take him as a head coach of one of the, and that's the thing, like, it's going to be easier than ever for programs in the Big Ten Conference and the SEC, because they're making more money because of these TV contracts. That's what you're going to see impacted first, is coaching salaries are going to be able to go up at all of those schools because they're making more money than everybody else. So it's going to be easier for a program in one of those two conferences to come in and potentially swipe him if West Virginia, has the kind of 2024 season that we fans all hope for. But, reducing his salary $400,000, I mean, I think it's admirable, very admirable. Then this is, like, very respectable for Neal Brown to want to cut $400,000 worth of his salary, because, man, in this economy right now, $400,000 in inflation, holy moly. Like, I'd like to have $400,000, but, to want to use it for an increased assistant pool, it just kind of makes me wonder and think to myself, because I am very aware, very knowledgeable, and I've mentioned it in some of my videos, of West Virginia's university's financial troubles, and was talked about right before the beginning of the school year, $45 million deficit. Does West Virginia and its athletic department not have enough money to be able to hire quality assistants, and instead have to settle for young guys like they've made hires this past fiscal year, and Bilal Marshall, the wide receivers coach, Blaine Stewart, the tight ends coach, and now Tyler Allen, an internal hire, as the quarterbacks coach? So again, history potentially repeating itself. Didn't we hear this same narrative with Rich Rodriguez back in the mid 2000s? It's like, I wanted to be able to pay my assistants, and I couldn't, and what? So taking this pay cut, reducing his buyout potentially if he's fired by West Virginia, he could have stood to make $3.2 million more if he was fired. But I mean, but then he gets the vote of confidence from Baker by getting another 4th year. So my last point is, now Neal Brown can go out to class of 2025 recruits, high school class of 2025 recruits, and say that he's going to be there for their tenure. I mean, that's huge. That's huge. As I said, how important that this year's high school recruiting class is for West Virginia to take a step forward as a program, to get out from the national media like a Josh Pate saying that they're the 10th best program in the Big 12 conference. That West Virginia has to raise the floor, has to do better from bringing in high school talent, getting more 4 stars. And again, it's been 17 years since a 5-star recruit has come to West Virginia, and that was Noel Devine. And we know the only reason he would have been here because he wanted to get far as humanly possible away from Deion Sanders, who was his, legal guardian or whatever it was. So West Virginia, and how many 5-stars play for Georgia? How many 5-stars play for Ohio State? That's the key, is West Virginia has to raise this floor of players on its roster shed the fat. The players who, once they're in there, I even say their third to fourth year's worth of development, and they're not in the too deep, gone, out, raise the floor, and make the wide receiver room better. Bringing in a Brandon Raymond, bringing in a Day Farmer, make it more competitive, make it so, a Rodney Gallagher or Traylon Ray have to make tough business decisions, like can they compete to be one of the best starting three on the to start on this roster, because you have young guys who are chomping at the bit wanting to take quality reps away from them. And, it's even more impressive to me why a player to like Hudson Clement can make it as a walk-on and now is being a projected starter for this 2024 season. So all of this to say is that there's positive vibes. If we looked at the different position groups, offense and defense, over many weeks now since the transfer portal really opened and we were closing the page to 2023 and opening the page to 2024, I go back to my list of what Neal Brown needs to do between the end of last season and next season to put himself in the best position to be successful as possible. Replenishing the depth in the transfer portal, winning the Dukes Mayo Bowl, retaining the indispensable list, seeing some guys get drafted, and you're going to have a definite in Zach Frazier to build up that argument about getting West Virginia players from Morgantown to the pros, finding another gem in the 2024 high school recruiting class, making the change defensively, philosophically, schematically in what they're doing, transitioning to a 3-4 with 4 linebackers, and now you have to do it in recruiting. If West Virginia is putting all these eggs into this basket of, into the spring or, summer camp series, and that's where they're going to get guys on campus, and that's where they've had these junior days and even going back, years in recruiting, that's where they're going to ink all their commitments. Holy moly, we might be talking about in 3 months, West Virginia, at least half or more of West Virginia's 2025 high school recruiting class is going to be signed or is going to be committed. So by Baker restructuring this, giving Brown some things to work with here, giving him, through his own means, I think there's a commitment here. I think there's, like I said, negotiating in good faith. Baker's going to do everything that he can to help out this football program, and Brown is too. And that's by having a good year in 2024 and building ahead for 2025, because what's coming in college football in the next year potentially could be crazy chaotic, crazy chaos. So stability means more than anything, as I always say. So I want to hear your thoughts. What do you think? What do you think on, did I lay it all out for you? That it's not necessarily a raise and a traditional type of extension, but instead it's really just a restructuring, adding a year, and putting all of the chips, putting all the cards on the table for 2024. What are your thoughts? You for it? You against it? I want to know. Leave your comments here on YouTube. Like this video if you've liked it so far. I got a couple more things to say, and I'll try and round it out a little over a half hour, hopefully. So next topic, FanDuel releasing its Big 12 sports betting odds, and I'm not a bettor. I just have very addictive personality, and I feel like once I do it once, I'm going to be hooked into it, and I don't want to lose that kind of money. So, but I do think that, again, Vegas doesn't exist to lose money. So if this has any ramifications for what the media narrative is going to be over the next 5 months, preseason polls, et cetera, we got to talk about it. Because obviously I take some umbrage with some of it. Utah coming in number 1 at plus 340. They're in first year as a member of the Big 12. Kansas State followed right behind at plus 360. Then there's a bit of a drop-off. So you can see some tiers that kind of form as I go through this. So then the next real tier closely together is Kansas at third at plus 650. Arizona at plus 750. Again, first year in the Big 12 for the Wildcats. And then Texas Tech at plus 850. So that's really your second tier behind Utah and Kansas State at the top. Your third tier at plus 1100, UCF, the Golden Knights, after coming off of just a little bit above average first year in the Big 12 Conference, and then Iowa State at plus 1,200, who did overachieve in 2023, given the betting scandal that happened with Hunter Deckers and their running back, losing quarterback and running back. Like, that could have derailed the season. Instead, going to Rocco Beck, really able to transform themselves offensively and had a pretty good year. Then the next tier, this is where West Virginia is, so now the fourth tier, you have Oklahoma State, who I think should be way higher, if you're asking me, at plus 1,600, TCU also at plus 1,600, then West Virginia, so 10th at plus 1,900. Then there's a huge drop-off, and this is where, then you have the rest of your conference, but starting it off next is at plus 4,000 being Colorado. So I'm totally fine with Utah, Kansas State, and really Oklahoma State in the top three, given their program track record, 3 quality head coaches, and what they have coming back. I also think there's a lot of momentum for Kansas and Arizona for a lot of the same reasons, just with less conference championship caliber success. So you want to put those 5 teams up there in the top 5? I think West Virginia is right there. I think they're going to contend with all of them. I think that this is a meat grinder of a conference, as it always seems to be, but it's not so top-loaded as it was last year with Texas, really is the star-studded favorite. With Texas and Oklahoma out of this conference now, you have this crab pot, as I've said many times, of these teams that are all trying to fight for the top, all trying to reach Mount Everest at the same time and reach conference supremacy. So Utah is coming in with a lot of expectations, just still in their first year. Kansas State has I like Chris Kleiman as a program leader. Avery Johnson looked really good. I think Kansas State might have added by subtracting and losing Will Howard. You have a more athletic quarterback, and I know Will Howard could run. He had escapability. Had some athleticism, but I think Avery Johnson's even better to a certain extent. Kansas State's so fundamentally sound. After coming off a Big 12 championship game win in 2022, last year taking a step back, still winning, I think, 10 games? So, they're going to be right there, I feel like. Kansas, I know they lost its offensive coordinator, and I know that Jalen Daniels hasn't played a whole lot in the last couple of seasons, but getting him back, getting Devin Neal back, they have a lot of positive momentum. In Arizona, losing Jed Fish, your head coach, you expect them, at least theoretically, to regress to the means. Have an up-and-coming, Heisman Trophy contending type quarterback in Noah Fafita, wide receiver Tetroa McMillan might be on the preseason Bolitnikov list, but as we've seen in 2018, that you can't win a conference championship with just a dynamic quarterback and wide receiver. You can get really close, but against some of the good teams, and what is going to be, I think, is just as equally as tough of a conference in 2024 in the Big 12 as the Pac-12 was in 2023, I think Arizona is going to have a rougher time, at least, than Utah, potentially, even with Fafita coming back and McMillan. So then and Oklahoma State, I think, has the most returners of anyone in the Big 12 conference. Weren't really expected to contend after all of the transfer portal attrition the Cowboys had this past season. Doesn't matter. Mike Gundy knows how to coach, reinvents himself, features Ollie Gordon, goes and wins the Doak Walker. So it's just like you always got to count the Cowboys in contention. But that's what I said. West Virginia's then right there. It's all going really to depend upon how much this defense can take a step forward really across the board at all 3 levels. Because I think we kind of know that West Virginia is going to be one of the high-flying offenses in college football, but that's really what's going to make the difference. And, obviously some mistakes here and there. And can Neal Brown make those kind of coaching decisions that are going to be the difference in wins and losses? And in West Virginia, not going to do stupid things like Garrett Green taking his helmet off after Hudson Clement has the game-winning Hail Mary reception, and Andrew Wilson, Lamp, kamikazing Preston Fox, and costing West Virginia the Oklahoma State game. So it's little things like that need to go West Virginia's way to be in that top 5. But because I don't see Texas Tech, they're just completely overrated all the time. Have the offensive firepower, blah, 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 blah. Joey McGuire, loud and proud. They have this awesome collective, but I just don't see it for the Red Raiders. It just seems like this narrative because of their offense every single year. Taj Brooks, great running back. I know they recruited a 5-star wide receiver coming into this year's class, but I'll believe it when I see it. And when West Virginia has to play them at the end of the year, Texas Tech is much more fallible at the end of the year in comparison to as they are at the beginning of the year. UCF, I thought they were just as loud and proud as Texas Tech this past year. And how many games did they blow? KJ Jefferson's damaged goods. I think he's, is the highest ceiling he's going to have. He already achieved 2 seasons ago. Javon Baker, I was surprised to see he's in the NFL draft for this upcoming year. He's your best receiver. So you're working in a new quarterback, in a new system, new receivers. You have a talented running back. And that's the thing. UCF's going to play great offense. How much better are they going to be defensively? Are you going to rely on this amazing, amazing true freshman class is going to be your saving grace? Or do you have some studs defensively? Because I don't see it. I don't see it on that UCF defense. Iowa State, I believe it when I see it with them. I thought that they had Brock Purdy. He was their saving grace as a program starter. Had they been able to reach that success again? Not necessarily. Has it taken a few years potentially to build that depth back up? That's what we'll see this year. How far can Rocco Beck in year 2 as starter take them, having to play the Mountaineers on the road too? So be interesting to see the Cyclones. I don't take as much umbrage with Iowa State where they are as I do with Texas Tech, UCF, and now TCU. TCU is so up and down. That's why I can't have them any higher than West Virginia, because I kind of know what I'm getting with West Virginia. That's why I think they should be ahead of TCU. I mean, I could put TCU down there with Colorado, I feel like. Sonny Dykes, pretty good coach. Obviously getting the Horned Frogs to the national championship in year 1 as head coach. But was that lightning in a bottle? With Max Duggan at quarterback and all the skill position guys that they have on that offense. So they can play offense. The defense hasn't really been able to figure itself out. I feel like even going back to some of the Gary Patterson years, just like TCU, especially pass defense, they were terrible this past year, even with, I think, Travius Hodges Tomlinson or whatever. He might not have been there, come to think of it. But anyway, TCU, West Virginia was able to beat this past year on the road. So I don't see why coming into this preseason, what super strides have they made as a program that tells me that they're going to be better than the Mountaineers. I don't see it. So what do you think? Should the Mountaineers be higher? Are you slamming the over? Are you betting that? Are you taking that plus 1,900 bet on West Virginia to win the Big 12 Conference? What do you think of those odds? I think they're low. Last thing I'll say, I know I'm over 33 minutes here, but I just found this interesting that On3's Andy Staples and ESPN's Cole Cubelic having West Virginia in the prophesied Super League, 24 teams each in the SEC and the Big Ten, looking at potential conference realignment that comes down the road. So all of the teams that are currently in the SEC, including Texas and Oklahoma, the newcomers, added 2 with West Virginia: Clemson, Miami, NC State, Virginia, Oklahoma State, Texas Tech, and Kansas State. And then on the opposite side in the Big Ten, it would be 24 teams, all the teams that are currently in the Big Ten, plus Florida State, North Carolina, Virginia, Pitt, Notre Dame, and Utah. So my thoughts on this. Interesting. Because while I really, really, really fear for West Virginia's football's ability to contend alongside these teams, namely a Georgia, an Alabama, an LSU, an Oklahoma, Texas, you name it, these heavy hitters in recruiting and in the top dogs of college football for the last 20 years. It would really nicely create new rivalries with Kentucky, Tennessee, North Carolina State, South Carolina, Clemson, while reigniting the rivalry with Virginia Tech as conference opponents and Miami. And you could probably have some non-conference crossover with Pitt, Maryland, Penn State, Rutgers. So you could still have some of that, Big Ten, SEC. So I like this setup much better than I do the current Big 12 structure. This is a mess in this Big 12. Now with Colorado, Utah, and the Arizona schools. West Virginia should not be playing a team from Tempe. I've been to Tempe. I love it. My brother went there. I've been there a number of times. But why should a team in Morgantown, West Virginia be traveling 3,000 miles to playing in conference a team in Arizona? Come on. Come on. So if the Big Ten wants to take the whole northern half of the country from Maine all the way over to, Southern California and split the country that way, West Virginia makes more sense, I would say, in this split with the SEC, to complete the thought, because unfortunately the Big Ten doesn't want West Virginia. It doesn't, because of the whole AAU status and not seeing West Virginia academically enough, that West Virginia just will get passed over because of that stupid reason. It doesn't have anything to do with sports, but that's the Big Ten snobbiness. Is, they think they'll beat you on the field, but they're going to beat you with their grades and their books at the same time. So we hear this with the ACC. Hence why that alliance came a few years ago that was stupid. The alliance between the Pac-12, the Big Ten, and the ACC, and they were the books, smart nerds out there, and the SEC and the Big 12 that didn't have any sort of academic standards. So, but yet the ACC took Louisville, who, U.S. News and World Report rankings, which everybody loves to reference, right around the same category as West Virginia. So I just think if, the big questions, I don't like the Big 12. I like it somewhat from some of the culture of some of these other land grant institutions, and other podcasts talk about this from time to time, that yes, it's nicer to talk with some Oklahoma State fans more so than it is to talk with some Pitt fans, just because of this arrogance of what Pitt thinks of itself, and they think down upon West Virginia. So, but at the same time, as I've said many a times, West Virginia is not going to reach its potential as a program unless it's playing its traditional rivals again. And it's pretty true of what we've seen of 12 years of evidence in the Big 12 conference. So, the big things that West Virginia, as fans and college football in general, that we have to be watching, and what dominoes could fall that would lead to potentially a 48-team Super League across two divisions, SEC, Big Ten, is what does Florida State do, and how does that impact the Atlantic Coast Conference? Does FSU's potential move destroy the ACC? Because do other teams follow suit and want to move? And then would any of these other conferences take them? That's the bigger picture question that I think that needs to be asked is, how does the SEC and Big Ten, with their television partners, want to create the new Division I of college football, of what's coming down? And NCAA President Charlie Baker's already put that out there, and I talked about this on one video. So if the SEC and the Big Ten, ESPN, and Fox all want to get around, a Justice League table and create their new world of college football, West Virginia fans, we're all sitting on edge, crossing our fingers, hoping that we could be added like this. So that's what I just think the pipe dream of an Eastern Conference, as Joe Paterno wanted it back in the 90s when the Big East was getting formed, is as a pipe dream. That's just simply put. I don't think, and then can the Big 12 survive as a third best conference, or is it just these Super Two, or does West Virginia be a part of it if it's clear that because right now I don't think we have absolute clarity that it is, even though the money's coming in more so to the SEC and the Big Ten, that they're just going to run away with it. I know the NCAA is falling apart. Another big domino that's going to fall is the new college football playoff format and how many automatic qualifiers go to each of these different conferences. I know that the SEC and the Big Ten are lobbying for 3, expanding the playoff to 14 teams, the Big 12 and the ACC getting 2, the G5 top-ranked team getting 1, and then 3 at-larges. So if all these things happen, it's going to come down to who's quickest to act, because I think the only way for the Big 12 to level the playing field with the others, and that's even close to getting a level playing field, I feel like, is adding the biggest fish. That being Notre Dame, Florida State, probably Miami, North Carolina, and Clemson. But they won't come. I doubt it. None of those 5 schools want to come to the Big 12 conference when they see more financial prosperity into and probably more what am I trying to say here? More stability, I guess you could say, even in the SEC and the Big Ten. Notre Dame makes absolute sense. I've been saying this for years now. It's like that the writing on the wall, I feel like, is for Notre Dame to join the Big Ten. So then how big does is the SEC going to stand pat? Like Greg Sankey said many times, and stay at 16 teams, or does it want to go to 20? Does it want to go to 24? If it goes to 20 or 24, does the Big Ten reciprocate and get to 24 as well? But then, because we know how the Blue Bloods run college football, are the 20-ish or maybe fewer teams the biggest of the big boys? So maybe it's more so like a dozen. Your Ohio State, your LSU, your Georgia, your Alabama, your Texas, Oklahoma, USC, Oregon, Penn State. Do those guys, we don't want it to get, that big. Dilute this pool. Does it go to a type of revenue shared tier structure like the Big 12 had, where Texas gets more than everybody? So those, 10, 12 teams are getting paid more than the others? Because that's what doesn't make sense to me. There can't be a college football world where among the best of the super conference includes Rutgers and Northwestern and Mississippi State and Vanderbilt. Come on. And no offense, because the Bulldogs are probably the best program out of those 4 that I just gave, but let's boil it down to 2. Rutgers on one side, Vanderbilt on the other side. But programs like a Florida State, a West Virginia, Miami, Clemson, Notre Dame, Pitt are going to, Pitt with its history. I'm obviously not a Pitt fan, but I'm just saying, decades worth of history as a proven competent program in college football. But you're going to have Vanderbilt and you're going to have Rutgers? No, absolutely not. So how big does the SEC, does the Big Ten want to get? If it's up to 48 teams, I think West Virginia's in. If it's closer to 40 or fewer, that's where I'm going to be holding my breath. That's where, if it's 20 and 20, I could see the SEC adding the 4 teams that are rumored the most. I think a Florida, the geographic fits, debating on who it's going to be really of these 4. But I think it's pretty obvious that Florida State, Clemson, Miami, and North Carolina are the big 4 who think they can do better in a different league. Financially, have the brand, can be attractive to not only the conference but these TV partners. So if they all make sense, then how many of the others get picked up by some of the other programs? That's going to be the biggest question. So I really like it. I like the idea, but West Virginia, again, competing against those Southern powers would be extremely tough. even tougher than it already is to contend in this Big 12 conference. And West Virginia's only had, really 2 years, maybe 3, that it's really been a serious conference contender in the Big 12. So everything would have to step up. And this isn't even going to that next level, talking about NIL compensation in the form of direct payments from the school if everything happens with so many different cases that are still pending out there in the court system, and what happens with this evolution of the new Division One, which creates its own new set of rules. The Tennessee is already passing legislation to be able to say, yep, tomorrow we could do this. We could pay our players to be able to be a part of this new Division One that's outside the purview of the NCAA potentially. So it's wild. How do you feel? Would you like to see West Virginia in the SEC with some of the other teams that I said would be included as well? Or the Big Ten? Do they stay put in the Big 12? Is there any sort of a possibility, of my pipe dream of an Eastern Conference that would say include a Penn State, West Virginia, Pitt, Syracuse, Maryland, Virginia Tech, boom, build some of that, like an just an Eastern block. Don't have to get as far south, but I don't know how many teams it would be, but it seems like it's getting bigger, trying to develop more and more like an NFL format by the coming months. So it's crazy time in college football, but at least West Virginia knows it has its head coach secure for this upcoming season. Always something to talk about with this program. So I'll be back soon. I'm like I said, gonna be releasing that very soon about all of the different fan experiences with college football. But I want to know, or with Milan Puskar Stadium and West Virginia as a program as a whole. So I'll be talking about that very soon. Love to know your thoughts. Leave your comments here on YouTube. And if you like this program, check out some of my other videos. I've been really working hard on this channel since this past August and staying up to date with West Virginia football, especially football news, to bring you my thoughts each and every week. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your dog that I have a lot of fun doing this and try and bring it to you every single week. Go Mountaineers. Hail West Virginia.